Hi, everyone. Welcome to People Potential. I'm your host, Amanda Fleising, and I'll be bringing on various guests to discuss empowering individuals and organizations to achieve their full potential. Welcome to another episode of People Potential with Amanda. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome my guest, Jocelyn Bérard. He is the president of the Central Region at Optimum Talent, which is an integrated talent management company and is now a division of Gallagher Benefit Services Canada. Jocelyn is based out of Toronto, Ontario, also in Canada for our international listeners, and he's an experienced executive who has also written a book titled Accelerating Leadership Development, which was published by Wiley. Jocelyn, thank you so much for being here with me today. And
My pleasure. Thank you, Amanda, for inviting me to be part of your podcast.
I'm so happy to have you chatting with me today and that we'll be able to get into some really interesting topics. Before we start, would you mind giving us a little bit more of an intro on your history in business and so that our audiences can get to know you a bit better?
Perfect. Yes, sometimes I like to say a bit with a smile that I'm a psychologist with an MBA, and because I am an industrial psychologist and I did an MBA, but really what it means is my passion for talent management and people's performance and helping clients to really perform, help business to be successful. So from a career standpoint, I'm from Quebec and from Montreal. I studied psychology, as I said. After my internship, I worked for a couple of financial institutions in human resource talent management. And then I had an international career for many years in Europe, the Middle East, and US, and a little bit in Asia as well, consulting with all sorts of size of organization and a lot around leadership development, selection, best practices, succession management, and all those wonderful topic in talent management. And I still do, although I'm an executive, I still do some work directly with clients, especially coaching CEOs and preparing succession. So that's a little bit about me.
So we can certainly say with your background that you are a person who's very passionate about people's potential. And that was a big reason why I really wanted to have you as a guest on our podcast today. So
Thank
let's
you.
get started with um, succession planning. And that's what most of us call it. That's what we search when we look online. But I think you have a slightly different opinion or different take on it. But Jocelyn, please tell me about succession planning versus succession management.
For sure. I mean, as you said, Amanda, the common nomenclature or name, those are obviously not protected names, but um, most of people talk about succession planning. And the reason I love to use succession management instead, and it refers a little bit to the history without being too long here. This is not a new practice. Like in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, some organizations like Pepsi Cola were well known to do a lot of work from a succession planning. And what it used to be, it was really about planning who could replace whom in the organization. We had the expression of the big binder approach. Like you would pay pages and pages of org charts. Imagine an international organization, and you would create this shadow org chart to say if Amanda would leave, who could replace Amanda. And that was really that's where the idea kind of came, the nomenclature came from, planning the succession. Um, that approach was thrown out the windows years ago because lots of input, lots of hours of talking who could replace whom. And when it was time to replace Amanda because she decided to go play golf full time or decided to go work elsewhere, well, the structure had changed, or the people we had listed were not ready. And really over the years, the best practices that were created and put in place are way more about, yes, identifying whom, but talent pool, not only for one position necessarily. And the emphasis is on managing the growth, managing the preparedness of those leaders, accelerating the development, hence the title of my book, so they're ready when there's an opening. So a list of names is not it's a step in the right direction, but it's far from being enough. What we need in succession management and succession is ready leadership. So the emphasis has to be on managing a process of activities that will lead to ready leadership when we need them.
So, really assessing and accelerating leadership readiness versus having that typical or old school laundry list of names, which people have or organizations have moved away from.
Exactly, exactly.
And
Assessment, accelerating readiness via development. I'm sure we'll talk about that in the dialogue today, but all sorts of ways to develop and accelerate the growth. Yes.
and full disclosure, as a partner of SuccessFinder, are you a SuccessFinder expert certified practitioner as well?
I'm a believer. But I use, through my career, I use multiple assessment tool. There's so many out there. And for the last 6 years, I've been certified and use a lot SuccessFinder and saw the power of it, especially to identify high potential in their development.
Absolutely. So it is, many of us know, but maybe our audience don't know that it is a tool that's really used in succession management practice at Optimum Talent and clients worldwide.
So,
Um, so let's go into reasons why succession management is very important, especially today.
yeah. There's different reasons, but the main reason why succession management in terms of needs or a practice for us as consultant, but in terms of needs and practice within organization as well, is obviously linked to the aging of the population. Like it's the main reason. There's more than one, but the main reason is that lots of baby boomers are retiring or partially retiring or don't want to be full-time and executive in an executive role. So that's the one reason when you hear organization that will say, over the next 5 years, 30 or 40% of our leaders may retire or leave the organization. That's a huge risk for organization. Lots of talent, wisdom, experience leaving, and organization are feeling at risk. And actually, it's very interesting to notice, Amanda, that more and more boards, company boards, will have that as a priority in terms of expectation for their CEO to prepare succession, not just for them, but for the executive team. So for the stability and the continuation of the organization. So aging of population is a main one, but also some organizations that are in a extremely fast growth will need to prepare leaders, or organizations that are making some significant transition in terms of directions or services and need to prepare succession because some of the people in place may not qualify it anymore. So, but the main reason is why we see it growing and being critical is the aging of the population and continuation of organization from a sustainability standpoint.
Absolutely. And what about the fact that organizations are becoming more flat? So, what does that really mean for the gap between those levels?
Yes. That's an interesting question because if we look at the structure, the typical structure of organization over, let's say, the last 20 years, generally speaking, organizations are more flat than they used to be. There's less and less of those assistant VP, assistant director, director, senior director type of levels. Hence, the gap between the different levels are more significant. The beauty of an assistant director or director to senior director, the step was a bit smaller. It was almost like going up the stairs, but one step at a time was easier. You're sort of prepared for the next level, where now you can see sometimes first line leader, director, vice president, and then C-suite. So the gaps are pretty big. And when you don't proactively invest in preparing succession, you end up having unprepared leaders. Years ago, I wrote a text and titled it the arrival of the unprepared. Because if you don't invest proactively, you cannot say, hey, in the next 2 weeks, I will invest and then that will be ready. You can't, you cannot just You can accelerate, but you cannot, condense it in a week or two. So need to proactively invest so we prepare leaders for the next step. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that brings me into my next question. And I know that's answered in your book. So I invite everyone to check out Jocelyn's book, which we will link in our show notes. And we will also be preparing, thanks to his agreement on this, a quick checklist and a document that our listeners can download after, as well as the link to the book. So, but let's go through together what are the processes or stages for a successful succession planning?
Yeah. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
So a few critical steps that I would say, and everything can be adapted and tailored to the different organization size and needs. But we like to say the first thing is I call it succession management blueprint. So almost like as if we would build the house of your dream, Amanda, we're not going and start digging right away. Like we create a blueprint like a good architect would do and say, okay, what does that look like? Where do we start? How much do we want to spend? Like a key question, where do you start in the organization? It doesn't mean you start at the top. You need to start where the organization is more at risk from a retirement or lack of succession standpoint. How will we communicate it? Who will be involved? So really planning, scoping, we love to call it blueprinting. Then comes a critical step is to define the leaders the profile of the leaders that will be successful in the organization. You can imagine if we would do succession with a more of a mid-sized technology, fast growth company, the profile of the successful leader may be different than a hospital that provides so much critical care these days versus a financial institution that is fairly stable. So what is the profile? Second step. Third step is to identify those high potential, like nominate, like look at performance and potential. And this is where identifying high potential and making, producing a diagnostic of their development needs is critical. And this is where psychometric assessment comes into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
We're super critical. But not just a psychometric assessment. I'm a psychologist and we do this type of work. And sometimes I say we have to be careful that we don't fall in love too much with our own solution, because it's also to look at knowledge and experience. What type of knowledge and experience do you need to be successful? Let's say we look at succession at the vice president level. So I mentioned the blueprint, then the success profile, identifying high potential and measuring their development needs, strength and development needs. And then comes, I would say, the most important part is the development one. This is where the investment need to be critical. Purposely designed, defined for each individual or small cohort, where what will we do to grow those leaders from a learning standpoint, providing experience, exposure, and so forth. And the last step is the sustainment of the process. It takes years to prepare succession. So like anything else, when you implement it, it's all nice and we're all excited and you put the development plan in place. And then if we don't follow up, a large number of those planned activities may not happen. So we need to make sure there's a follow-up. So those are the critical key steps.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that in such a concise way. And we'll be putting together a checklist for our audience. So that's a great value added material. Thank you so much. So let's keep going with really what are the risks of not being proactive and preparing for succession, managing, planning, whatever people will end up calling it. But if they don't do anything, what's the risk?
Sure. Um, there's many. We can talk about business risk, or I would say people's risk. Um, Especially when you talk about succession at the executive level, literally we can see the sustainability and the continuation of an organization. There is a risk of, if lots of people are leaving, especially at the same time, There's significant risk. Not every organization may disappear. And of course, you will hear people say, hey, everybody's replaceable. Of course, everybody's replaceable. But if you have significant amount of people leaving and people with lots of experience in the organization, you really put the growth or the sustainability of the organization at risk. Years ago, I'm going by memory here, I would say about 10 years ago, you may remember a law firm called Heenan Blakey in Canada.
Yep.
Well, that firm doesn't exist anymore. It completely disappeared. Multiple issues, but one of the critical issues was a complete lack of succession plan within the organization that caused all sorts of other ripple effect, negative effect. But it was a significant reason, and there's literature on that. It's obviously public information, and that was the negative side. Versus if you look in Canada, we have multiple banks, but 5 large ones, and they're a poster child model of preparing succession at the top. I don't think I recall any CEOs in our banks that were not promoted from within. They prepare them years in advance. And you need a pool of people because you don't know exactly you cannot identify one person 10 years before, like you need to have a pool of talent, but they're a good organization and we can see the performance that is sustained after that. So and the people risk, just a quick comment on that, is when you don't prepare succession, it causes sometimes all sorts of people leaving or not appreciating anymore, morale issues, engagement issues, because suddenly you have, as I said, the arrival of the unprepared and make other people suffer from that. So.
Absolutely. That is a significant risk and two different kinds of risks that we cannot ignore and organizations can't ignore that in preparing for the future. So that's why it's such an important topic. I don't want to forget to chat about an example that you brought up when we were talking before the recording about the Vancouver Olympics.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. Vancouver Olympic and other Olympics after that. I'm, as I said earlier, I'm passionate about human performance, and I love this whole idea of identifying potential. I do that from a leadership standpoint, but I love reading, watching high performers in all sorts of discipline, especially the Olympics, because it's just fascinating to see high potential athlete with sometimes miserable financial conditions and being their life being dedicated to their sports. If you remember the Vancouver Olympics, and now I don't have the year in mind. 2010. Okay, good. Thank you. I can remember. I was saying about 10 years. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We, in Canada, we didn't have the Olympic for quite a few years, and especially many years for Winter Olympic. It was Calgary, which is 20 something years earlier. And the federal government put a program in place called Own the Podium. And it's a perfect example of succession management in the world of sports. Because years before the Vancouver Olympic, they went across the country in all the different sports association and identify high potential athletes. And it's not something that was not done at all before. It was just done more systematically. I'm a short track coach and speed skating short track coach, and 2 athletes were identified in our club, and they invested in them for years in more coaching, more practice, and psychologists, exposure to international events. So what it did is it created this pool of highly prepared athletes months before the Olympic. And you know how it works, like you select just a few to go at the Olympics, small number. But it was from a pool of wonderful athletes that had lots of investment provided to them. And at the Olympics in Vancouver, we performed better than ever at the Olympics before, and more in number of medals and more gold medals. And the program was applied to other Olympics after, and it became a model of how to prepare athletes. And I think it's just so interesting to compare that, to say what they've done years in advance. Don't start the week before or 1 year before. Identify many of them, because some of them left, some of them did not perform as well, and whatever, somebody fell sick. And so, but at least at the end, they have this talented pool of athletes, sorry, who were well prepared, and not just the training, the exposure and all of that. So that's a perfect analogy for a program for succession.
I love that. So I think it was called Own the Podium was
On
the
the podium,
program.
yeah, on
And
the
it's
podium, I'll say, yeah, on the podium.
so incredible, the years of development, honing skills, but giving the right experiences as well, and investing in people's potential. So, I mean,
Mhm.
that's what we're all about. Let's just shift to today's environment. We're in 2021. A lot of us working remotely, working from home is the new trend. And,
Mm.
it's a new reality that will certainly shift workplaces and work styles in the future. How should a company go about succession management in today's environment, in a remote environment or mostly remote? Or, what have companies been doing?
Um, I would say the fundamentals of succession are the same, right? I described before the steps and some of those practices. There's a few challenges because we're remote. Um, when it's time to identify high potential leaders, we always say make sure you cast a wide net. And really, what we mean by that is be careful not to look just in the head office or the largest region or the biggest department where there's lots of people. You may identify some really good potential leaders in a remote region or in a smaller division. And I remember doing work with an organization, utility organization, and if you're in a power electrical organization, utility, you think of the core division, but they had like this subsidiary, and this is where they found some gem in terms of leaders. So I said, make sure you cast a wide net. Well, if it's already a challenge to make sure you think of looking for everywhere in the organization. If we're not even together, if we don't even meet together, I may forget about you, Amanda, who's like a very quiet person working in a small division, because
Hmm.
so we need to be careful not to forget about them, about casting a wide net. The other thing that is, I would say, a little bit more challenging is when we get to the development part. Like, remember what I said about accelerating development. We believe in training. I believe in formal education. I have 4 university degrees, and I believe in formal training. We do that for a living. But a lot of what we learn by experience. Most of people heard about the 70-20-10, learning a lot by experience, learning from others, and learning from formal learning. So providing opportunities, situation where you can help your high potential to learn and grow by experience, you need to really do it purposely when we don't even meet. Because if we would be in a meeting regularly, we would say, oh, Amanda, there's this meeting or this committee that's been formed about implementing a new IT system. It would be a great learning for you to be part of it. But if we have not met in this meeting, and if we don't meet at the cafeteria or the lunchroom,
Yeah.
I may forget. So that this is, as I said, the fundamentals are the same. We just need to make sure we don't forget about some casting the wide net and making sure we provide exposure experience, even if we are remote. So,
Absolutely. I know it's helped me personally in my career so much to have experience in different departments, and having had the opportunity to do a company wide rotation. That experience was invaluable to really understanding the perspective of different heads of departments and how we can collaborate together. So it will certainly have to be done with a lot more purpose. Um,
yeah.
in a remote work environment. So it's not that it's impossible. It just needs even more advanced planning and structure and management of the entire process.
Absolutely. I'm just going to add what you said there, because that's a very good point. And I think, if I recall in a dialogue, you came from a small, medium enterprise, and that's why you had the chance to sort of go from one department and the other.
Yeah.
And that's such a great practice that unfortunately sometimes is a bit limited The bigger the organization, the more specialized is the organization. I work a lot with a pharmaceutical organization or healthcare, and become so specialized that you wouldn't dare to say, oh, you should go work on this other department. So, no, 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 you're not a specialist like we are. When in fact, of course, if you talk about the technical skills, they're specialty. When you talk about leadership, now you're talking about leading organization. You're behind the bench, you're not on the ice anymore. So moving people around, moving them from different department, different team, full P&L, support function, head office function, field operation. And I'll go a little bit further because sometimes people say, yeah, but Jocelyn, we can't move around everybody. Like if you, almost like dominoes, you push 2 or 3, like it's 15 other positions need to be changed. And so there are opportunities to move around in a career, but you can learn by experience still by staying in your current role. Like I just gave the example or referred to earlier, like a common example of a system changing organization. You're rolling out an IT system or a new CRM or whatever, implementing a new methodology across the organization. Being part of a committee like that is a great experience because now you're going to see laterally what's happening in the organization. Being part of an organization that will develop and launch a new products and a new service. I can be in a support function, or let's say I'm in the finance department, you're in sales. I don't need to transfer to sales, but I can work with you, Amanda, regularly when you write a proposal, when you pitch to a client. I can accompany you sometimes to meet clients to understand their needs. It gives me exposure to. So we work with clients occasionally to create a book of experience, a list of situations that have high impact from a learning standpoint. And it could last one day, it could last a few days, it could be a committee that has been consulted by the government, and I'm going to be part of it. So there's all sorts of ways to learn by experience that does not necessarily require to always move to another position.
Those are wonderful examples that seem practical and easy enough to apply for companies today. So I encourage any of our listeners to use those examples when working on their succession management plans. Before we wrap up, just in case any of our audience don't know about the 70-20-10 methodology, would you mind just describing that for them? Thanks.
Yeah. It's very well known, and I always say this is not a scientific measure. Like it's not 65 or 70. The message here is if you think of everything you learn over a career, not when you're a student at university, if you think everything you learn over your career, there's about 70% that you have learned by experience. Learning because I was immersed in a situation, learning by mistake, learning by being part of a project. I was never trained to work in other countries. I learned because I was transferred to other countries and worked in Europe and Asia. So learning by experience, small experience, big ones, and then so forth. About 20% of what we learn over a career, we learn from others, your leader, your coach, colleagues, maybe learning from somebody in your family, but learning from others. And about 10% of what you learn in your career, you learn from formal learning. Think of training, you can put even reading a book in there. And as I said, if you think, well, my son is still at university, well, he's in formal learning 100% of the time. But if you think of 15, 20 years, 25 years of career, it's about 2070, 2010. And the message there, if we learn a lot by experience, when we want to accelerate the growth of high potential, what I'm saying here is don't pay lip service to the 70. It's okay to send them to take a finance course and provide a coach, but most of the learning will be by exposing people to different situations, providing experience so they learn. But it has to be the right experience. If I need to learn about finance, put me in a situation where I'm going to learn about finance. If you are a director of finance, well, you don't need that. You're already a specialist. You probably need to be exposed more to and learn about sales or marketing, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Absolutely. Learning by doing and focus on that 70%, which can have the biggest impact in
Yeah,
preparing and planning for
exactly.
succession. Thank you so much for being on this chat today, on this episode of the People Potential podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to many other conversations.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today on People Potential with Amanda. I appreciate each and every listen and view. You can find the show notes on the SuccessFinder blog or library page of our website. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter for all kinds of value-added content. Until next time, stay curious.